So I'm going to say something very controversial. And coming from the world's biggest Spider-Man fan, I want to bring up a conversation and hopefully have some dialogue around why I think Spider-Man sucks. I know what you're thinking. Vinny, you're crazy. Spider-Man's the best. Everybody loves Spider-Man. He's one of the most recognizable heroes in all of comic book fandom. And I have to say, if you ask one character that I think is my favorite character of all time, it's going to be Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man because I think when I was reading comic books as a kid, he was the one that I found most identifiable to me as a person. And I think that's why a lot of people love Spider-Man. So why does Spider-Man suck? Well, he doesn't suck. But what I have to say is, what I should say is, why can't Marvel get Spider-Man right? And I think I know why. And if you look back into the heyday of Spider-Man comic books, probably to the late 70s to the early 90s, that John Romita Sr., and all the way up to Todd McFarlane when he first came in onto Amazing Spider-Man in the early days of his tenure at Marvel, is when I would say is the golden age of Spider-Man, when you had the most compelling Spider-Man stories. It was definitely some of the most impactful comic books written ever, including the death of Gwen Stacy, death of Green Goblin, Peter Parker getting married to Mary Jane. There's just so many things that happened in that era that you can't even count them all. But it's just a huge run of comic books and an absolute dominance of storytelling. So one of the key contributors to me as to why those comic books were so good is what Marvel was getting right about Spider-Man at the time was Peter Parker. Peter Parker was the most relatable character probably in all of comic books. And those comic books really focused on Peter, not necessarily just on Spider-Man. Sure, there was a lot of web slinging action. There was all kinds of great feats of power and good versus bad. But really it came down to Peter and how Peter lived in his day-to-day life. He wasn't like Batman. He wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't like Superman. He didn't have every power under the sun. He was just a regular person who dealt with things on a daily basis. And when you saw that, yeah, Spider-Man can save the day and save people's lives, but he was struggling to pay his rent or his crime fighting, took a toll on him personally, whether it was his relationship with Mary Jane, his relationship with other people personally, how he hid his secret identity, all the things that were really, really good and compelling in those day and time. It was around Peter and why Peter Parker, he's probably the only comic book character where the secret identity is more enjoyable. That story and that part is more enjoyable than the actual part where he was fighting crime as a superhero. I think what Marvel has done for the last 20 to 30 years now, since kind of like the late 90s up until now, where they've had flashes of getting it back, but not really understanding, is they took all the wrong lessons as to why Spider-Man was good. Everybody thought it was about the spider powers, and they've tried to expand the mythology of Spider-Man and taking about like how he got his powers and changing what the origins of his powers were, and then giving duplicate versions of him and making other versions of Spider-Man. It wasn't the spider powers or the Spider-Man costume, which is totally cool. It's awesome, by the way. That's not what really made those books great. They took all the wrong lessons. One of the best things that they did in comic books over recent years in Spider-Man was introduce Miles Morales. When Brian Michael Bendis introduced Miles Morales into the Ultimate Universe, which is a whole nother story, let's not get into the Ultimate Universe. When they first introduced it, it was a brand new character, a brand new person. It wasn't just a reboot or a rehash of Peter Parker, but he used a lot of the things that we loved about Peter. It was about him. It was about his family, about school, just about the things that he was going through on his day-to-day life. That's what made him so compelling. And that's what made him so interesting. And that's why people love Miles Morales probably just as much as Peter Parker now. He's a universally known character. And quite honestly, he's just a doppelganger of Peter and kind of a remake with a fresh take. And again, when that success happened, Marvel took all the wrong lessons. They weren't paying attention as to why people were liking Miles Morales, just that they liked another Spider-Man. So they're just introducing all of these spider characters, and they're giving everybody spider powers, and they're giving everybody all these different things. And I just don't know if Marvel understands exactly what it is, and they've been trying to recapture that magic from the 70s to the 90s for years now, and they just haven't. And I would love to see someone really dive into Spider-Man and start figuring it out. One of my favorite Spider-Man comic books that came out in the early 2000s, but it was like funny because it was a one shot. It wasn't a regular writer, a regular artist. It was in the series, I think, called Tangled Web. And I believe the artist writer was a gentleman named Care Andrews. And Spider-Man's fighting a supervillain, and they crash into a building. They wind up having this knockdown, drag out fight inside of someone's apartment. And two kids were left in that apartment. And the parents weren't home. They were out to work. And the whole entire book is drawn from the POV of these children. And they're just watching and they're in awe. Like, these kids have Spider-Man toys. They're just loving Spider-Man. And they're watching this fight and they're trying not to die. And Spider-Man's trying to like save them in the middle of it and like trying to defeat this villain. Finally, at the end, long story short, he beats the villain. The villain's taken away. And Spider-Man stops and looks around. And he sees that like the things that he did to fight that supervillain, he destroyed this family's house. He destroyed all their belongings. He didn't know what to do. He felt so responsible. He felt so terrible that this fight, him trying to stop this supervillain, caused all this pain to this family. And Spider-Man goes into his sock or his boot, I should say, and he pulls out an envelope and he takes out a wad of cash and he gives it to the child and he says, "Here, I'm sorry. This is all I have. I hope that this helps." And he swings off. And then you see on the other side of the envelope, it said rent scribbled on. And like, now Peter's got to figure out, while he was on his way to pay his rent, which was probably late, how he's going to have to pay his rent. And that really kind of sums up Spider-Man for me as an adult version of Spider-Man, not the younger version of Spider-Man. But, you know, that's kind of the energy that I think that Marvel needs to find and reintroduce into Spider-Man, and hopefully get, you know, some more juice going into the Spider-Man comic books, because they come close all the time, and I just feel like they haven't gotten there. I hope I haven't pissed off anybody at Marvel. I do love Spider-Man. I got so many Spider-Man toys. It's not even funny. I am part of the problem. I am encouraging your bad behavior. So please give me more reason to buy Spider-Man comic books. I'm for it. All right, everybody. Bye.